Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dishing with Stephanie's Dish, the podcast where we talk to people doing things with cookbooks and cooking. And sometimes we just talk about funny stuff too. But I'm here today with Debra Arbit. And I was introduced to you by a friend of ours, Allie. And she was like, you have got to hear my friend Debra's story. She's doing something really cool. So go ahead and explain what you're doing, Debra, for the listeners, because it is pretty fun.
Okay. Well, I always tell people I have a very strange and weird hobby, and that is that I like to cook my way through cookbooks cover to cover. I don't skip a single recipe. And yeah, I've been doing it for a handful of years, but like so many people whose hobbies maybe were a little bit laying dormant, but picked up during COVID time. So I've sort of taken it to a new level during COVID time. So often people, when I tell them this, the first thing they say is, so it's like Julie and Julia, the movie Julie and Julia. And I'm like, it's like that, except not so much French cooking and much more normal day-to-day cooking for a family of five little kids and just kind of normal cooking. So
Okay, so you have five little kids. What ages?
No, three little kids.
Oh, okay.
Plus one husband, plus me. So five in the family. Yeah, no, not five little kids. I don't know if I could keep this hobby if I had five. Three is enough for me.
How old are your kids?
My kids are 8, 7, and 5.
Okay, so when did you start doing this?
So the very first time we decided to cook our way through a cookbook is we got an engagement present, actually. So this is 12 years ago now. And we got the Martha Stewart cookbook, Great Food Fast, which is really a great cookbook. And sadly, it is out of print. If you wanted to get it, you'd have to get it from eBay or something like that. But anyway, it's a great cookbook. It had 250 recipes, and we decided to make it our goal to finish all 250 recipes by our 5-year anniversary, because at this time we really didn't cook much. We mostly went out to restaurants, did takeout, did real basic stuff. But we set a goal and we completed the goal a few years before our 5-year anniversary. And as we started talking to people about it, we kind of got connected with people, and we ended up being connected with someone who worked for Martha Stewart. And so she was able to get my tattered and torn cookbook in the hands of Martha after we finished it, who signed it and sent us a picture and all of this stuff. So that's, I think, what kind of launched the hobby, that I was like, maybe there's other cookbooks I can finish. And so far, every cookbook I have finished, I have successfully been able to get signed by the author of the cookbook. And so I have them displayed, and it's really fun.
That is so cool. So what other books have you cooked?
Let's see here. I have completed Minimalist Kitchen, which is by Melissa Coleman. She's a local Minnesota author who I just love. 2 Peas in Their Pod was a recent one I've done every recipe in both of the Half-Baked Harvest cookbooks, both her original Half-Baked Harvest and Half-Baked Harvest. Super simple. Big Tegan fan. I'm currently about 80% of my way through The Defined Dish. Oh, and then I've done 2 of Jessica Merchant's books, both Pretty Dish and Everyday Dinners. So I think that's it. There might be a couple others. I think I've completed eight complete cookbooks, and I've got about 3 or 4 underway at any given time. So
that was my next question. Do you do it in like a sequential order, or do you jump around between books?
Good question. So I used to do one cookbook at a time, and I was like very meticulous about doing one cookbook at a time. But what I've discovered is that some cookbooks are maybe a little bit too indulgent to eat every single day. And some cooks are maybe a little bit too healthy to eat every single day. Or some cookbooks don't have any desserts, and some cookbooks have all desserts. And so I've learned that while some cookbooks I can do more kind of right in a row, others often require like a complimentary cookbook along with it. And so I'll usually have 2 or 3, especially actually lately. We've been trying to eat a little bit more plant-based, a little bit more vegetarian, but we're not ready to make the dive to completely vegetarian. So I usually will have one that's more vegetarian forward and one that's not as much vegetarian forward. So yeah, that's usually how I do it.
And then you're chronicling this on Instagram too, right?
Yeah. So what happened was, again, COVID, the instigator for so many things, good and bad, is that another thing that's sort of started this hobby, I'll back up a little bit, was that several years ago, I made it a goal to host, this is all pre-COVID clearly, to host 40 Friday night dinners in my house with 40 different families with 40 new recipes I'd never made before in 1 year. So in a 52-week period. So that was a goal. I'm obviously a sucker for a goal. Clearly, I'm a person who likes a goal. And so I did that. And it was so fun and so much fun to entertain. And I just learned to absolutely love everything about it. But of course, COVID put a halt to all of that. So I no longer had an outlet to cook for anyone except for my family, who, other than my husband, the other three don't appreciate so much. So they mostly, want what they would be the happiest if I made Kraft macaroni and cheese every night. So I was like, well, how can I kind of scratch the itch of wanting to cook for people without being able to cook for people? So turned to the magic of Instagram and started an Instagram called For the Love of Cookbooks. And on that Instagram, I post almost every night a story of showing me cooking my way through a recipe I've never made. They always have to be a new recipe every night. And then I'll post typically weekly my Friday fave of the week before. So whichever was my favorite or the family's favorite from the week before, I'll make that a post. So it's been really fun to kind of cook for people without cooking for people. So
yeah. And do you so your kids, do they eat what you cook? Like you're not making separate meals for them?
Good question. This is a question that's probably the number one question. This is probably the most common question that I get asked is, do your kids eat all of this? So we have a couple rules in our house, which is we don't make a separate meal for kids unless it is really, really spicy. That is the one time that I will make an exception, is if we make something really, really spicy, we'll make something for kids. And I would say 2 of my kids eat great because they eat almost everything we put on the table, and 1 not so much, because there's always one picky one. And so the rule in our house is that at any time you can always get any fruit and any piece of cheese to go along with the meal. And so he will often, survey what I have made and go directly to the drawer to get a piece of fruit and a piece of cheese. And he'll usually eat a little of the carb or a little of the thing, but we don't try to make a big deal out of it. We mostly just want mealtime to be a happy time and not a bite counting time. That's something we talk about a lot. We don't like to count bites. So for the most part, they do eat. 2 of them do eat what I make. 1 of them, just like every other household, classic kid who'd rather eat white carbs.
I love that idea, and I love your rule because I think it gives power to the kid, which a lot of times food becomes a power struggle for families, and particularly at mealtime. So It's giving your kid choices. It's still creating a lot of exposure to lots of different types of food. And it's not making a big deal out of it. It's just, this is how we eat in our family. And if you don't like what we're doing, here's your alternative. And you just keep going. You don't make a big deal out of it.
Yep, that's exactly it. We really don't talk too much about it at all. And I kind of early on in our parenting journey, we had this realization that we were like, we've encountered a lot of grownups in our lives. We know a lot of people, and really all of them eat food pretty normally for the most part, right? Like almost everyone figures it out and eats food as a grown-up normally. And then we said, but in that same group of grownups that we know, not everyone is necessarily an awesome person. Maybe they're not so kind. Maybe they're not so giving. Maybe they're not these other things that we really hope our kids are. So we're like, let's focus our energy there. The food stuff will probably work itself out. I'm like, from what we've seen, the food stuff will work itself out. But this other, stuff may or may not. So, let's try to raise nice people, and the rest
I love that.
Be fine. So,
yeah. You sound like a really cool person. So what was
you
your,
too.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I only had 1 kid, and if I'm being honest, I wasn't the best mom. Like, I did my best, and she's okay, but I obsessed over the wrong things. I was controlling over the wrong things. I'm still probably controlling. I finally let go that she hadn't gotten her booster shot. And then, of course, that day she texted me, Mom, I got my booster, because I've been just hectoring her every day. What was your eating like in your house growing up that gave you this curiosity? What was your family like?
That's a great question. I've not really thought about that. First of all, my mom is the best. And she's probably listening to this right now. And I actually, on a side note, always want to figure out a way to incorporate her comments on my stories into my stories because they're always so funny. And I'm always the only one who gets to see them. So one thing about my mom is she eats like a kid. If she could eat her ideal diet, it would look a lot like the middle child, the one I was talking about earlier. So I would say that she always had dinner made. Dinner was absolutely a family event. And that is absolutely what I learned from her. So it wasn't about that it was a fancy new recipe or that it was covered in, cilantro or avocado or anything fancy. But it was absolutely a priority that dinner happened. And it was a time for our family to see each other and talk and do that. So that's definitely something I learned. And then also my mom is so good at making people feel welcome in her home and hosting. And she had the holidays and all of those things. And again, the food was never anything super fancy, but it didn't matter. It was great. It was traditional. She kind of made the same things over and over, like so many of us grew up with. And, but I think the two things that I've carried with me are just the importance of mealtime, not about food, but the meal, and the importance of just opening your home.
Yeah, because like I grew up, my house was always super messy. We had a lot of kids. And whenever anybody came to the house or it was a holiday, it was like, the 5 days prior of just completely beating the crap out of each other, trying to get it clean and ready and prepped. And then by the time the actual person came, we were so exhausted and crabby and couldn't stand each other. And I remember thinking like, this shouldn't be this way. Like by the time the person comes, it should be fun. So one thing I always did in my house, and I only had one child, but I just always kept it picked up so that whenever someone came over, it wasn't always clean, but it was like I never felt like someone would come to my house and not be able to have a seat and be comfortable. And, I didn't obsess over that. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people really freak out about that their house has to be perfectly clean and everything scrubbed. And I guess I really want people to just come into my home and enjoy being in my home. And I miss the entertaining aspects from
Oh,
COVID.
I miss it so much. I mean, we're starting to do it a little tiny bit more here and there with certain families, but it's not with the reckless abandon that we used to, but I'm
Yeah.
hoping one day that'll come back. I was going to add to what you said. I actually read an article like years ago that had a great impact on me about, when you apologize for the mess in your house, how uncomfortable it makes your guests feel. And so I force myself not to. And I'd say, I mean, we definitely we don't live in a pigsty by any means, but there are times when there are Legos all over and
Sure.
trains all over. We've got 3 little kids and we've got a full busy life. And I force myself that when we have people over that I do not apologize. Because I really think it puts people more at ease to not apologize, because most of the people we're having over also have little kids, also
Right.
have Legos all about the floor. And I find that when you come over to people's house and they start apologizing for usually what is a very clean house, it only makes you feel less comfortable about having them over to your house.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's never what makes people feel good about coming over. They're never like, what was great about that dinner party? What a clean house it was.
Yeah.
And so
And
I try not to think about that.
this next question is going to be kind of be weird, but there's also because I've entertained a lot, and there are just people that entertain and they're good at it and it's fun and it's not always fancy. It could just be soup. But then there's also people that never entertain and you never get invited to their house. They're probably just not comfortable with it. Do you feel like, I don't want to say keeping score, but do you ever think wow, this person's been to my house 52 times and I've never been to their house?
Good question. So I do think about that a lot. That one thing about my Instagram on For the Love of Cookbooks is that people look at it and often try to compare themselves to me all the time. They're like, how do you have so much time to cook? How do you cook a new recipe every night? How do you have all of these hosting things? And I try to tell them that what's interesting about having a hobby around food is that everyone has to deal with food, right? So if my hobby was knitting, no one would look at for the love of cookbooks and say, why don't I knit more? I really should knit more. No one
Yeah.
would say that, right? If you don't knit, you wouldn't even compare. But because everyone has to cook, it's easy to get into the comparison game. And what I try to tell people is I'm like, this is my hobby, just like anyone else's, right? And so I'm going to take more time doing it. I am going to be happy to host and not be hosted reciprocally, is that a word? Every time, in an even fashion, because if it was up to me, I'd host every time. And I'm always happy to go to someone's house if they want to invite. But in this one case, and I am you can ask my husband, sort of a notorious scorekeeper with things like garbage, cleaning, who packed lunch, like all the things I don't like doing. I am like definitely can be a not nice scorekeeper in my own house. But with this, which is like truly my passion and my love, again, if I go back to knitting, it's not like if I was an avid knitter and I knit you a hat and I wouldn't be like, when was the last time you knit me a hat? Like it's not something that other people have a passion for, but I absolutely do. And so I just categorize it so much more in the hobby category than in the feeding my family category, that it just feels different to me. So
I'm loving this conversation. Do people give you cookbooks because they want
yes,
okay.
That is definitely a, occupational hazard of having this Instagram is that people love to give me cookbooks, which is wonderful. And also kind of the sad part about the way that I cook through cookbooks is it's a big commitment to choose a cookbook because even I'd say the smallest cookbooks usually have about 100 recipes. And that's a lot, right? To cook 100 different recipes from a book is usually a few months of project, for me. And so there are certain cookbooks that just are more suited to that than others. Some cookbooks were never designed to be cooked cover to cover like I do because I've sort of deemed myself a completionist, which is I love completing things. Whatever that thing is, I just have lots of joy about completing. So anyway, so people do give me a lot of cookbooks. And then, of course, I feel pressure to be like, they're all following on, and they're like, I didn't see it on your Instagram. And, and then I'm worrying that they feel bad. And I'm like, I am often using the cookbook, but not in a way that I'm going to make it like the featured cookbook that I'm going to make every recipe in it, So yeah, that is definitely, but I would actually say that even more than people buying me cookbooks, I will say that I feel like so many people come to me for cookbook recommendations. And I feel like I've sort of become like the Pandora of cookbooks because I'm like, well, I can't recommend a cookbook without asking you like 15 questions about what you like to eat, how you like to cook, how adventurous are you with different ingredients? Do you like to cook ahead? Do you like to cook the last minute? And then I feel like I've gotten pretty darn good at matching people to the cookbook, kind of the right cookbook for them. So,
and all of that matters. And as I'm talking to you, I'm writing a cookbook.
I've heard about that. That's so exciting.
It's due by December 31st. So I'm really in the home stretch here. And
wow.
I often think about like, what is it going to feel like for someone who I don't know to like cook these recipes? Because my recipes aren't hard. They're more inclined to be like on the tasty family, everyone can do it side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also like kind of feels personal. And I have like a huge imposter syndrome going of like, oh my God, are these going to be like worthy? And also like I've discovered, and this maybe doesn't sound super glamorous, but like for instance, I'm thinking about making a Hasselbacked potato gratin for Christmas Eve.
Yum.
Well, I've made a million potato gratins, sweet potato, anchovies, no anchovies. Like there's a million ways you can do this. And when you actually start looking for a specific recipe, you realize there's 1,000 of them and everyone has their own spin. And really no recipe is kind of like your own for the most part.
Yeah.
And that feels weird too, because like sometimes I'm like, oh, am I just putting this stuff into the universe that's already in the universe? And I'm just saying it's mine. Like I have all this imposter syndrome going. But then I look at a cookbook and I'm like, okay, essentially they're kind of all the same too.
There's definitely a formula. And the more cookbooks you do, you're like, okay, here's the roasted tomato basil bisque. It's in every cookbook.
Yep. I have it,
like,
just so you
here
know.
we are. There's always a tomato soup, and there's often a pot pie, and there's often, like, whatever.
I got a pot pie too.
Yeah. And that's great. And like, you kind of get a rhythm. Something I talk about a lot is that, again, I mean, even in the name of my, For the Love of Cookbooks, is this idea of, I consume cookbooks like you would a romance novel. And I write that in my thing, that I think of them as a story. Like the whole book is telling a story. Whereas so many people, most normal people, use cookbooks as a reference book, right? So they kind of like look to the table of contents, they turn to the page they want. They may or may not read the little paragraph. I love the paragraph that the author writes. I like really, really read it and appreciate it. And I do feel like there's like a story arc to a cookbook and kind of what they're trying to do. And you only discover it if you cook almost the whole thing, or if the whole thing. But on that note is that, just like a book, if you were to pick up a novel, it's not like every single page has your jaw dropping. It's not like every chapter is the climax, right? And so a lot of the book is just getting to know the characters, filling it in, kind of reeling you in. And then there's moments that are like real big moments. And that is just like a cookbook in my mind. So I'm fine with the tomato soup. It's like not every night can be the star curry that I just fall in love with in this one cookbook that I go to over and over and over. Or there's, in the current cookbook I have, there was, and it like shocked me because it didn't look like it was going to be anything special. I still think about it. There was a salmon recipe that I'm like, this one I'll never forget, and so and that's fun. And then there's lots that just are a meal. And that was like last night. I made enchiladas. They were good.
And it was a meal.
And it was a meal, and everyone was fed, and it tasted like enchiladas, and they tasted fine. But I wouldn't even want every meal to be an over the top experience. It's like too much.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you just want to eat food. And I think that's kind of why I'm not Julie and Julia, right? Is that not every meal is 3 sticks of butter and all of these fancy spices.
Right.
Like, most of them are just kind of pretty normal. But on your imposter syndrome, I actually have a friend who's writing a cookbook. So when I first started For the Love of Cookbooks, I just did the story and then posted the picture. But people started saying, well, how was it? How was the recipe? So then I started featuring a rating system. So at the end of each recipe, I give it a score, 1 through 10. Okay. It's not exactly scientifically based. It's just 1 through 10. And, it's interesting because the person who has this new cookbook is like, I don't know if I could, I would be so nervous with every recipe of like, what did it get? Did it get a 10? And I'm like, well, they can't all get 10,
right?
And so like, if they all got 10, no one would even care to look or to see, And so I've actually only given like maybe 5 or 6 10s. I give a lot of 9s, but 10 has got to just be
right.
Absolutely over the top. So anyway, to your point about imposter syndrome, on a side note, this is this is not my full-time job. This is absolutely a hobby. My full-time job is I work with women-owned businesses and their owners. That's where I work with Allie about, how it really can be so lonely at the top as a business owner. I owned my own business for about a decade, and I help women feel less lonely. And it is so common. I mean, I don't think a day has gone by without someone having imposter syndrome about something. And so, and I often just say, and I will say to you kind of like, what's it going to take for you to believe that you're a cookbook author? And usually people can't totally answer it because they're sort of like, well, I guess I am. And I'm like, exactly. And so when you kind of stop to think, what's it going to take for me to believe it? And as soon as you get to the point that you can't answer it, then you're there.
Yeah, I think maybe I saw a cover, so I feel like, okay, I'm making some progress. Maybe when I hold it in my hand, I don't know. Yeah. I do know the way I wanted the cookbook to feel was I wanted it to feel like my friends feel when they're in my space at my cabin, that they love to come there, that they look forward to what I'm going to cook, and that it's fun and it's So that I think is coming across definitely in like the storytelling of it. So I'm excited about that piece of it. And I think that is what, if I'm anything, I'm usually someone that people kind of think is funny and sort of enjoy hanging around. So that I feel like I'm accomplishing in the book. So people that don't know me will maybe get a sense of what it feels like to be in my orbit and to be friends. And, that's really all you can do, right? Is just leave your mark as a decent human and a good friend. And maybe I'll get more sophisticated as the books go on. I wanted a book that my sister's not a great cook. I wanted something that she could cook. I wanted something that my daughter would have, that she'd be like, wow, this is all the stuff my mom cooked at the cabin growing up. So there's a little bit of nostalgia too, but yeah, that's interesting.
That.
You seem like you seem like you have a real wisdom about you, almost like you're a coach or something like that. I can sense that about you. You're very self-aware.
Thank you. That's actually like the absolute utmost compliment. I'm sorry that I can get. I always tell people I can work with absolutely any type of leader, however they want to lead, any kind of friend. But the one thing I really can't deal with is when people are not self-aware.
Yeah.
I'm like, as long as they know about their own, shortcomings and flaws and all of those things, I can deal with anything. And so thank you for saying that, because it's something I really hold up high. So.
All right. So 2 questions and then I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
Number 1, what was in the salmon that you just made? Like, why was the recipe?
Oh my gosh.
Amazing?
I can look. So first of all, I should say the cookbook was the defined dish, which I am really liking. I'm doing it right now. And the salmon was pretty much like covered in pesto.
Yum.
And so I've done that before, but then it was sprinkled with panko on top. And it was like amazing.
Okay.
Truly. Like I said, when I saw it, I would not have thought this is going to be the winner, but it absolutely blew my mind.
And the funny thing about that recipe is like Ina Garten has one just like it.
Exactly.
Because again,
there's nothing real special, but there's something about this. And again, the other thing about salmon is it could have just been an excellent piece of salmon that we got or something like that. But there was something about this meal. It was lemony and it was just amazing. So
do you know what the next book is that you're going to give your time?
Oh, that's a great, great question. I've got a few on the docket. So there's one I really, really want to do, but it's very big. So I'm trying to decide, but it is I've really been eyeing all the Ottolenghi books.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm going to attack Simple.
It's great.
Okay. You like that one?
Yeah,
okay, good.
Really...
And then the other one I really want to do, but I absolutely can't. So I hope that this doesn't take down your book. I'm sure it won't, but I cannot get involved in cookbooks that don't have photos.
Yeah.
And everyone's been telling me salt, fat, acid, heat. That's the best cookbook, but it doesn't have pictures. And so I keep trying to pick it up. I have it. But I just don't know if I have it in me to do an entire cookbook without photos. So
have you read it?
No, I not really. I just kind of leaf through it and it's not like compelling me. Like, again, like other books where sometimes you just look at it and you're like, nothing is compelling me to open this, but tell me about it.
Here's what I'll tell you about that book is it's a good read. Like I read cookbooks, like I read books just like you.
Yeah.
So it's a real good read. And it is a nice companion to her Netflix series.
Okay.
But I don't think I've cooked out of it, but it doesn't compel me to like cook all the stuff either. It's a lot more like about technique.
Yeah.
And some of those books are great to read, but maybe not as fun to cook out of.
Yeah.
So maybe
that makes total sense.
Maybe I'll alleviate any anxiety about that one.
Okay. That I'm not maybe missing too much. The other thing, first of all, I would love to check out your cookbook. I'm going to need to get myself
it comes out next summer
on that one. So in the summer, so by then I'll maybe be done with this next one, which is per an earlier comment. I'm a huge Half Baked Harvest fan and her next book comes out in February. And I am like, and it's just, I think it's called maybe Everyday Meals or something like that. So it feels like it might work as well. And I just think maybe in the several hundred recipes I've made of hers, I've maybe made 2 bad ones. So she's very reliable, which I
feel about Ina Garten.
Oh yeah. Yes, she is. I mean, she's classic. She's like the queen.
the way that she cooks feels like the way I want to eat usually.
Yeah.
It's prepared, but it's not like overly prepared. But the Ottolenghi books are challenging.
Yeah.
Even the simple book is a little challenging because sometimes it's funky ingredients, but the way that the dishes come together are really always delightful. And you're like,
Yeah.
wow, I didn't know this was going to be like this. It's so much better than I thought it was going to be, is usually my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's fun.
Well, this has been a blast. I will make sure to get you a cookbook when the time comes. I think it's being released after Labor Day in the fall. So
so I could get like 5 cookbooks done in between.
Yes.
I'll only take it if you promise that if I finish it, you'll sign it.
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Just, even if you just read the stories and you laugh, that'll be fun too.
I will definitely do that.
Well, thank you for your time today. Have a happy holidays. I'll make sure to get this posted and put your Instagram handle so that people can follow you. Perfect. It's been a blast, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So nice to meet you. Maybe we'll meet in real life sometime.
I hope.
That would be awesome.
Or go out with Allie. Yes.
Let's do it. My God. Maybe I'll have you over. We'll cook.
It'd be
fun.
All right.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, Stephanie.